Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see you all.
Good morning.
I have been just waiting for this conversation. I'm really happy that y'all are here to be a part of it. Um, my friend Glenn Stanton is right here from Focus on the Family. Glenn is going to be a part of this. Jonathan Rausch here uh, from the Brookings Institution and a famous writer. He's going to be a part of this. But which one of you is gay?
He's gay.
When we were starting Braver Angels, there were two people I called, among the first people I called to ask to serve on our founding board of directors were Glenn Stanton and Jonathan Rausch. And therein hangs a tale. And the purpose of this conversation, one of the purposes, is to tell that tale and to let you in on the discussion that follows. Some of this we haven't really said publicly before, and it's a Braver Angels story about people that, let's just say, have some differences, and a kind of to me an interesting story about the time that we lived in when gay marriage was such an important issue in the country, and of course in some ways still is, but that intense time, and then where we are now with the whole those issues. So we called this thing a conservative and a gay guy walk into a bar, but it's the story of these two men and what it might tell us about, well, them, about what we're trying to do at Braver Angels, what we look up to at what we look up to at Braver Angels, and also where we are today, and then open that up for some good conversation with all of you. I'm glad we don't have a huge group. This is going to be a good thing. We'll really get to talk. But I want to start, fellas. Just thank you. I want to start, and I'll start with you, John. Just tell me who you are. Just take a couple of minutes and just who are you?
Well, my name is Jonathan. Friends and family call me John. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, born in 1960, a very different time for homosexual people. In America, we could not work for the government or serve in the military. We were imprisoned, arrested, even for just socializing. We were vilified by Christians. We were considered insane by the psychiatric community. That's the world I grew up in. I went off to college. It took me a long time to acknowledge what was very obvious, which is that I was attracted only to people of the same sex. I came out, as we called it then, in the height of the AIDS crisis, when just being intimate with someone could result in death, and when many people could not even get into their life partner's hospital rooms because they were legal strangers. The family member, the parents or the siblings of the sick person would fly in from the opposite coast and slam the door shut, and that would be it for the person who is the life partner. They'd be excluded. So when marriage suddenly became a national issue in 1994, I was 34 years old, and I immediately saw it as my issue. I saw this as a pathway toward strengthening the bonds of gay couples for each other. I saw it as strengthening their bond to their community, the recognition that they would have as a couple, and the expectation.
John, why did it become an issue in 1994?
1994, the Supreme Court in Hawaii looked like it was about to promulgate same-sex marriage. That was overturned in a referendum, but suddenly everyone's in an uproar. My God, the courts are about to do this. And I also thought this would strengthen marriage. I was a marriage advocate, a social conservative who believed that folks like Focus on the Family had something important to say about family values. I thought a lot of things that were going wrong in society were because of fatherless America. Some guy wrote a book called Fatherless America in that same period, and that got my attention because I thought that guy was right. Um, what became of him? He wound up on
He went
Skid
on to
Row's-
great fame.
He went on to a checkered career.
Yeah, this is the guy here on the platform. His first great contribution, a wonderful book, Fatherless America. So I was queued up for this. This was my cause. I thought, above all, it would mean that kids like me who are growing up gay would have a destination for love within their community and with each other. And I thought that would mean that kids would not have to grow up with the kind of fear and shame and desolation that I experienced.
John, you told me once, if you don't mind, I'm going to not get the language right, but you told me once about the feeling about being on a boat near the shore, on a shore. You know what? You remember the conversation? You remember like you were looking back on the shore and how come I'm not there? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think I was probably talking about the period in my late teens and on into my 20s when I was doing everything I could to fight the idea that I was homosexual because I knew that that would be a hard life for myself. And I didn't even think I was gay. I was deep in denial. I just thought I was the only person on the planet who is incapable of experiencing love. That's how far I was willing to go to deny. And it wasn't working. Nothing was working. And realizing that I would have to make this transition to being a member of a pariah class with no prospect of social acceptance, much less of marriage, was like realizing that I'm on a boat and watching the shore recede, seeing the life that I had planned for myself gradually get further and further away until it would disappear over the horizon. Is that what you were
That's
recalling?
what I remember. Yeah, I remember we talked about it once. Glenn, tell me a little bit about yourself, brother.
I am Glenn Stanton, and I just want to say, like, what John just said is what attracted me to John. Like, he's just such a genuine individual. Like, and people are complex, and that's a big, big thing for me. And we've got to like be able to hear people's stories, even as we hang on to our convictions. My convictions. I'm Glenn Stanton. I have worked as the director of global family formation studies at Focus on the Family since 1993. It has been my life. It's been my commitment.
Glenn, give us one. No, I mentioned most people know what Focus on the Family is.
Yeah.
Give me one sentence on what is Focus on the Family.
Yeah, Focus on the Family is an international evangelical organization, Christian organization dedicated to the preservation of the family and the home. Founded by Dr. James Dobson, who was a clinical psychologist at USC School of Medicine. He wrote a book back in the 70s called Dare to Discipline. It blew up, went huge, and he started Focus on the Family out of that. And it went from Dr. Dobson and a part-time secretary to 1,300 employees at our height. We're trimmed down a little bit now. We're about 900 employees, and I have been a part of that for a long time. And what I do there is, and this is really how I met David, is I do sociology, anthropology, and theology of family. I'm studying the family from as an institution itself. And my job is to help put together arguments and data and information for why our convictions matter and why our convictions are right. And part of the joys of that is not just listening to my own people, and I've done this ever since the 90s, is go listen to people who you completely disagree with and see what they have to say and garner from them truths that strengthen and impact and enhance what you believe. And it's interesting, just real quick. I mean, John said, kind of how he started. What this all started for me, I can tell the story real quick. I remember as a probably 12 years old, watching on.
Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, grew up in Pensacola, Florida. So grew up in the South. I've lived in Colorado ever since 1993. I kind of consider myself a Southern boy. But I remember watching on a black and white television footage from Bull Connors, Birmingham. Dogs attacking and fire hoses attacking American citizens on an American street. And just being like, it was then that I found moral outrage. And I'm a 12-year-old kid. And I asked my mom, I'm like, is that real? And she said, yes, Glenn, unfortunately, like that is real. I thought it was movie footage. She said, yes. And I'm like, okay, that is wrong. And I'm going to commit myself to making sure that never happens again. Fast forward a couple years later, my mom was volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center. And she had some material, her training material on what abortion was. And the same thing, I remember like, Mom, what is this? She goes, that's what an unborn child looks like. This is what abortion does. And I remember like, okay, that is going to be my work as well. And so I went from that in the pro-life movement to going upstream to saying abortion is really a family problem, a lack of support for women problem, and that happens in the family. So I'm going to commit myself to working for the family.
And
And that's where I am today.
Glenn, before you were at Focus, you were with one of the family policy groups.
I ran one of the family policy groups. So Focus on the Family has these relationships with state groups. And in the middle of my tenure at Focus, I like took leave and went and worked in South Carolina.
In South Carolina.
Yeah.
And then you went back to Focus.
Glenn, when were you born?
1962.
So we're
I'm-
about the same age.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at Focus, is most of your work consist of writing, convening, public speaking? I mean, it's kind of a think tanky kind of thing, or yeah.
That's a good way to say it. It's what I call like a populist think tank. Like I'm thinking, I'm reading widely. I brought John's last book. I don't know if it's not your last book.
He
but-
writes them
yeah.
faster than many of us can read them.
Right, exactly. So just reading very widely, but bringing those ideas together to write white papers, write popular articles, go to conferences. And I work in the popular realm, work a little bit in the academic realm. I'm not an academic at all, but
So Glenn, and the gay marriage issue comes up. People start saying about marriage should include same-sex couples. One of them's this guy. Actually, an important one's this guy, but we'll get to that in a minute. Your reaction to that idea, your reaction and within the Focus community, your thought about that idea when it came up.
yeah, that's a good question. It has a bit to do with you, David, in your book, Fatherless America. And
He wrote that book.
right, yeah. And
I knew there was
he
something.
caused all the trouble. But Fatherless America was really, and I remember, David, I asked you, I called you up and I asked you, I said, so do you in your book, like you don't really address what it is that fathers as male parents do. You just talked about like the societal fallout when fathers are missing. I was super interested in what is, because there aren't just parents, there are male and female parents. And male and female is what creates the family. Like that is a fundamental conviction for me. And then same-sex marriage, for me, was the challenge of that.
Challenge of that conception of what is family? What is the family?
What is family, and are male and female essential for the family, or are they just simply optional? That was the like full-on existential question for me. And I saw it as a threat to males being optional for the family or females being optional for the family. And that is it. Like Jonathan in his marriage, if it's a legitimate, just as good as anything else marriage, then what do we do with the female part of that?
What-
That was the philosophical
And
question.
you became active,
Yes.
writing, public speaking, organizing within the evangelical community, but also communicating more broadly. this is a bad idea, this is a challenge to the family as it has existed, and that was your.
Yes, when same-sex marriage started, Focus on the Family was getting media calls like crazy. And everybody's like, give them to Glenn. He likes to do this stuff. And I remember like the first couple of media calls, like, okay, I'm a moron at this. Like, I'm not developing good answers.
And I had
but
the same thing happen.
but the more I engaged it and the more interviews, like I was sharpening my arguments and like sharpening my developed way of thinking. And then from there, I was eager to debate the issue on college campuses, not because I wanted to be contentious and go out there, but I wanted to go out and try to demonstrate with other people like John and a number of other people that I had debated through the years of there are good arguments on both sides of this issue, and we need to be able to demonstrate that.
Okay, so John, when and why did you become enter into the public debate on gay marriage?
I was working for The Economist magazine in London, and
But you weren't in London, were you?
I was in London.
Well,
This is
okay.
1995, and I had written an article, not yet published, for New Republic, eventually a cover story, became well known, making a case for same-sex marriage from a social conservative point of view, what I thought was your point of view and your point of view, which I shared about the importance of family and community and all the things that marriage brings to that. It's not a piece of paper from the government, it's much more than that. And I went on a walk with my father in September of that year and told him that I was going to make a commitment that this was going to be a cause, something I'd be writing about, probably for years to come. We didn't expect to win. And he begged me
You
not
didn't
to.
expect to win the issue.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about 2 generations from then, if ever. Remember, same-sex marriage at that point was hugely unpopular with the country. It was something that David Blankenhorn and Glenn Stanton had never given one moment's thought to and never wanted to give one moment's thought to. It was a crazy idea, and that's what my father told me. He said, if you go down this road, he said, I have nothing against your being gay or any of that, but if you go down this road, you will cease to be taken seriously as a journalist and intellectual. People won't want to publish you because you will seem like such a fringe figure.
And did you think he had a point?
I thought he might have a point.
And you said what? Went to that.
I thought you only get a few times in your career, if you're lucky, when you stumble upon a right answer in the world of public policy and affairs. Fatherless America was one of those, and I thought this was one of those.
why
And
did-
I also thought no one would make the case for the socially conservative importance of same-sex marriage if I didn't do it, so I did.
But why did, I mean, you were not that far away from the time when you were still dealing with your own, I mean, you were wrestling with this as part of your own identity. You're not a crusader. You're a journalist. I mean, taking that step from the role you were in to that, did you have a sense of this was a big change in your life, or this was a scary moment, or this was an exhilarating moment, and you were going to go put on your Superman costume, or what?
Well, it was exhilarating to think that we had the right answer and something to contribute.
You were convinced that this was the right answer.
Yeah, I thought this was one of those rare times when you get, it's what you felt when you wrote Fatherless America. It's an important idea, it's the time for it, and I'm the person who can say it. But I was doing this work in response to and dialogue with my former self. I was then only 9 or 10 years away from being that deeply frightened, deeply closeted, deeply twisted soul-tortured individual who thought he could never love anyone or ever win acceptance in America. And that was who I was trying to liberate myself and other people from.
When did you, there was, just say a little bit about uh, you became very well known. When did your book Gay Marriage come out? When was that?
April 2004.
2004.
This is right after Massachusetts legalized same-sex marriage.
2002 was in Massachusetts, right?
2003.
2003.
October 2023.
So then your book comes out the next year.
Yeah.
Just say a little bit about the gay. I say I don't go to your meetings of the gay thing. What was the? Tell us about the so-called conservative case for gay. Was that a term you used? Would you say? Tell me about the conservative case for gay marriage and how you saw your role in that and with others.
Well, I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was a Washington policy journalist, and I was looking at issues like economic inequality and crime, and had come to realize before
You had written a couple of books on other
other things,
completely-
yeah, in Washington, what went wrong. But I had come to believe that while I deeply, deeply objected to what I thought were the homophobic aspects expressed by organizations like Focus on the Family, on the Christian right, that they were not wrong in their view that at the heart of a lot of other things going wrong in America was the dissolution of families and the pressure on that. So there was that. Same-sex marriage was fundamentally a conservative cause in the gay world. It was rejected initially, first by the left-wing activists who believed that they spoke for the movement. They thought, well, why would we want marriage? That's the very sort of bourgeois institution that we are trying to liberate ourselves in society from. They felt the same way about military service. You know, military service, that's what we should be against. What's now called LGBT, what was then called gay and lesbian establishment, was also against it because they thought it was a loser. They thought there's no way we're going to get this. It'll be a huge loss at the Supreme Court. Let's go for job employment protections. So what you had was actually the intellectual argument for same-sex marriage was coming from two places. People like me and Andrew Sullivan and Dale Carpenter and all the people you know who are on the social right saying, wait a minute, this is family, community, this is about giving back, this is about structure, this is about all the things that conservatives care about. And the second place it came from was the gay and lesbian grassroots. We really needed this. Going through a pandemic in which your loved ones are sick and dying, and legally you are complete strangers to them, that is hell on earth. And we emerged from that saying, never again.
And did you feel that you and Andrew Sullivan and those intellectuals within the gay movement, did you feel that you were a minority within the gay and lesbian world? I mean, did you feel like you were not only a minority in terms of the larger society, but you were not going to win within the gay, I guess you might say, within the gay movement? I mean, did you feel that was or did you think like, oh, what were your thoughts on that question?
When I entered this debate in the mid-90s, I didn't know. It was very much up in the air. It wasn't clear which way the movement would go. Ultimately, the grassroots drove this toward marriage, and no one in the movement was going to be against legal equality. The real debate was, well, do we value marriage?
Yeah, right.
Do we care about it? Do we push for it? But once it became clear that the grassroots really wanted this, then I think everything else followed. And by the late 90s, early 2000s, it was pretty
Yeah.
clear that we on the bougie side were fighting downhill.
Glenn, well, let me just speak for myself for just 2 seconds, and then you can say where you were on this issue. I had I'm doesn't make me proud of myself to say this, but I thought they were just kind of going for the gold ring, you know. And I thought they were going to kind of conquer a part of, you know, we too get to do this without doing it, you know, without actually, you know. I thought it was like a political symbol, like a symbol, like,
Stunt.
well, oh, I wouldn't have used that word, but some version of just, you know, watch us take this as something that we can. Did you have those feelings or no?
It's
In
a,
other words, it was a questioning of, it was almost a questioning of good faith. And I remember you and I, John, having very long discussions about this, and it was you very rarely. Well, anyway, let's just say let's say you had a different point of view on that.
And the one time you really pissed me off was
Yeah.
when you said publicly something like, "We don't really want this.
Yeah,
We're just using this."
using it. Did you have any of those feelings or no?
that's a great, I mean, what I hear in David's question, what I want to answer is yes and no. I mean, like, this is a big conviction for me, is like, you can't go, oh, here's what the gays think, right? You know, like, some did, some didn't. When you read retrospectives today, like, yeah, hell yeah, we got marriage. And then there's others who are like, no, we got the quiet, simple life that we've been looking for, the recognition that we are full citizens and we can enter relationships. Like, and it's the same in the Christian community. Like, oh, I know what the Christians think. Oh, do you? You know, I've heard that for decades. Oh, please tell me what I think, you know? And so the answer to that is some did. And like John said, like, there were those in the gay community who were like, we are not the white picket fence people. We have no interest in marriage and settling down whatsoever. The whole thing about being queer is revolutionary, you know? And you have those two sides within that community.
I remember
And it's a
Fran
very real
Lebowitz saying that
tension.
it's the best thing about being gay. We don't have to do that.
Right.
Okay, so I want to now switch the conversation. I want to jump ahead a little bit to what I think was an incredibly interesting moment. Focus on the Family was, I think, pretty much far and away the largest organization in the country, grassroots based, millions of followers, literally.
Had its own zip code.
Yeah,
Had it-
and this is him.
had-
Him as a reporter,
had-
like,
had it- had
he
its-
knows details
had
that
its
are
own
great.
had its own zip code. Um, leading leading among Christian conservatives, I would say, leading the effort to stop gay marriage. Full out. At a certain point in all this, at a certain point, John went to the headquarters of Focus on the Family to give a talk. I wanted to explore that moment for a minute from both your perspective and yours, John. I would imagine that this wasn't happening often in Focus, bringing in gay guys to give lectures to your staff. How did that invitation come about from your point of view?
Yeah, this is an interesting development, and that day that it happened was a very, very special day, and we'll get into that as to why. But so I explained earlier, like my job at Focus on the Family is to help us be really smart about what it is we believe. You know, let's not just pound the pulpit and say, "Hey, we believe this." Like, let's research and investigate the various arguments, break them down, find what's good, reject what's bad on both sides, and let's be strong about what we do. So I proposed, and I thought John's book on gay marriage was the best book, making the
It's
case.
called Gay Marriage, Why It's Good for Gays, Good for Straights, and Good for America.
Yeah.
And it was an important public, it was an important book, and it kind of was the standard bearer for a certain kind of argument. You had read the book. Okay, so just tell the story of what this invitation.
And I had, quick commercial, written my own book on the topic, Marriage on Trial. But I read John's book and I'm like, okay, if you're going to consume yourself with the best argument, it's John's book. And so I was doing a lecture series at Focus on the Family where I was bringing in kind of different people, and I proposed John coming. And I remember my boss at the time, very, very good guy, he said, Glenn, why would we give a gay man a microphone for an hour and just let him talk to our employees and say anything that he wants? And I'm like, okay, that's a good question.
Not a bad question.
Yeah. And I said, well, if we are going to stand strong on where we are and our conviction, wouldn't it be wise if we had the smartest, most articulate case maker for this thing that we're against so that we can hear his argument and it can strengthen our own argument?
And they bought that?
They bought that.
And so you invited John to come to Colorado Springs to give a talk.
I asked John, and like I didn't know what he was going to say.
Called him on the phone or something
Called him on the phone.
All right. So let me just switch over. Many Christians had a point of view about homosexuals that what the behavior you were engaging in was immoral and sinful, and many Christians believe that you would be ineligible to enter into heaven. This was not a minor offense. Many Christians and others believed that it was a criminal activity. Should be. I guess it was When was the Texas case, John? 1996. That was the first time that it became not illegal. Is that right?
Oh, that was Lawrence v. Texas,
Yeah.
2003.
2003. Okay, so around that, so many Americans, including many evangelical Christians, thought it perhaps should be a jailable offense, a fireable offense, fired from your job. And the leading organization, and we had just had an AIDS crisis where many, many people had died, and some small minority of Christian leaders suggested that this was divine retribution against an immoral lifestyle. From this context, you were invited by the leading organization that in general is fighting gay marriage to come give a talk to their team. What was your reaction to that invitation?
Well, can I use the word surprised? That would be an accurate word. I was also thrilled. Now, I should mention that as background, Glenn and I had established by that point a relationship of trust, because on a whole different subject, actually, this subject, I had written a book before any of the gay marriage stuff came up, and he had called me up out of the blue to tell me he liked the book, and we talked for a bit and got to know each
This
other.
was this was
This is
Kindly
Kindly
Inquisitor.
Inquisitor.
Kindly Inquisitors.
So you
knew it.
called him up. Did you know he was gay when you first
It's in the
reached out?
book. So
Oh, it's in the
he
book.
read to the end.
You said it in
course-
the book? Okay. So
So it's at the end of the book, and I
Yeah.
don't know if Glenn read the whole book. So I don't
Of
know.
course I
did
read
you
the
read
whole
the
book.
whole book? Okay. Okay. So you
His first book is under my pillow every night.
so okay, now this is a good part of the story. So you had reached out to him, there was conversations on the phone and so forth, and there was some relationship of trust between the two of you. So when you invited him, it wasn't just some guy.
Yeah.
It was a guy you knew.
I called him up and I said, now listen, I know you're a horrible gay man, but I just read your book and I think it's fantastic. No, the book was Kindly Inquisitors. It was written in 1993, and it was a brilliant book, and it really presaged, if you will, sort of what we're seeing today in cancel culture. It was a call for defending speech that you don't agree with. Kindly Inquisitors are the nice liberals who like, I'm sorry, you can't say that. And he
Okay.
was calling that out.
Okay, and so you thought that was great.
Amazing book.
You thought those were the berries.
I mean, enough so that I looked up his number, and this was probably in 1994. I looked up his number and I said, hey, you don't know me, I don't know you. We come from different sides of the aisle, but I want you to know, like, I underlined like all through your book, like, it's wonderful. Thank you for writing it. We need more voices like this.
It is a wonderful book. It's a masterpiece and a classic. It's still in print and available at fine bookstores everywhere, as well as on Amazon, in a revised and expanded edition.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the reason it's important to know all that.
Yeah.
When Glenn called, it was Glenn. It wasn't some person in the PR shop. And I trusted Glenn. This would not be some kind of a weird thing or a setup. And of course, as a journalist, I was fascinated with Focus on the Family, which was a bigger deal then than it is now, I think it's fair to say. It was under new leadership. Jim Daly had taken over. He was a very different stamp of leader than Jim Dobson. So I wanted to go there and see it. And plus, as David will tell you, because I debated him up and down the country on marriage, I thought
Till I finally got you to change your mind.
Exactly, yeah. I thought that we had the right answer and we had a good argument, and I was pretty much willing to debate anyone, anywhere. I think this whole attitude that you see among so-called queer activists today, I say so-called because I don't love that label, my generation, is, we shouldn't have to educate you, go Google it. I think that's wrong. I think you have to educate people, you have to make your case, and I was happy to do that.
Okay, but
So it was curiosity
just
and optimism and trust that sent me to.
And real quick, when I did call him, I mean, I remember him saying, you're from Focus on the Family. Like, are you at the headquarters now? Prove it. Like, is this a crank call?
Is this a crank call? I just want to push this one more minute because there is a point of view out there today, and we run into it at Brave Angels a lot, that says, the way I've heard it put sometimes is, why would I want to engage with someone who wants me dead? Why would I want to do that? Isn't that harmful to everything I believe in? In other words, it's one thing if we just have a disagreement about tax policy or something, but if you are saying publicly things that directly, even physically threaten me, why would I want to talk to you? Why would I put myself psychologically and emotionally in that state? And what good would it do in terms of the goals I'm trying to do? Now, we run into this a lot at Braver Angels. So that's the reason I'm pushing you a little bit on this to say, when you accepted the invitation, I'm not saying you believed, I don't know what you believed about the people at Focus, but just,
I knew they didn't want to kill me.
yeah, yeah. All right.
They
So
want me dead. I was pretty sure about that.
pretty sure about that. But just say a little bit more, if you would, about your decision to say yes, to go into a situation where, let's just say, the disagreements could hardly, well, you say it in your own words.
Well, I didn't know what kind of reaction to expect. I didn't know whether anyone would even attend this lecture. If they did, I thought I might be peppered with adversarial questions. I welcome that personally, because um, whenever I'm in a room making the case for something I believe that's controversial, I try to remember that the most angry and hostile person in the room who is trying to make it uncomfortable is not representative of the rest of the room, and that person provides me an opportunity to show that I can engage in a civil and informed way. And I'm not talking to that one adversarial person. I'm talking to all those quiet people in the room who are saying, yeah, that guy's got a point. So I didn't mind adversarial if that's what happened. It's not what happened in the end. I also feel that it's my duty as a member of an American minority group to do what I can to push forward the cause of minority rights, in this case, what we call gay and lesbian rights, marriage equality. And I understand that because we're minorities, we can't just assume that we have a right to be agreed with. We have to go out and make this case. And finally, I believe that as emotionally sometimes difficult as it is to go out into a world that is sometimes uncomprehending and sometimes actively hostile and make a very unpopular case from a place of vulnerability, as hard as that is, it's also an incredible privilege, because the dissident, the minority, is always the first person in society to perceive injustice, inequality, and the need for reform. The view of society is always clearer from the margins, and I view it as the great privilege of my life to have had the opportunity to do this work of educating. And that's why I despair so much when I hear people 40 years younger than me saying, well, we shouldn't have to do this. You people should all just agree with me.
A quick point on that, David, with the relationship friend is you talked about, well, the people who want to kill you and that kind of language, and you're parroting or imaging like what is out there. There was an essay that Evan Wolfson wrote. Evan Wolfson was another one of the founding articulators of why same-sex marriage should be legal.
And,
in
and
this,
I would say, I don't know if you would second this, but I view him in some ways the kind of director of strategy. I mean, for a winning movement. I mean, he was maybe not the only one, but I mean, a very important person in this world.
very, very important person, but he wrote an essay in a book, in a major kind of compendium of different voices and sides. And it was a reprint of an article that he wrote, but he says, we are up against the people that will deny us the very breath we breathe. And I read that, I'm like, dude, you're not even a serious person. You're just not. John's like, no, these people want to enact things that are harmful to me, but he rose above the hyperbole that was just ridiculous.
Okay, so what happened from your perspective, John, on the visit? What happened? How was your experience?
If I could set up real quick,
Yeah.
just like, because I'm in charge of this event, and we gave John a here's my friend John. He wrote this book. We don't agree with it, but it's a brilliant case. And you are going to have the opportunity, Focus employees, to hear from one of the best minds on this issue.
Then I want to go to John.
Yeah.
Did you offer any suggestions to him as to topics he should avoid or not avoid, or things did you give any sort of regulations about?
Just don't say bad things about Jesus. No. You know, like, here's a microphone.
Well,
Thank you for coming.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was literally Glenn's introduction. It was one of the shortest introductions I've ever received, therefore also one of the best. I remember I was shown into a medium-sized room. It wasn't huge, nothing like this, so it was more intimate. I wasn't sure what to expect in terms of how populated it would be. In the event, my recollection is that every seat was filled. Probably 80 people in the room, would you reckon? And there were some people, I think, standing in the back. And I made my argument. I walked through the basic ideas of the book, and we had what I recall to be a very polite, civil, and not unusual type of Q&A. So from my
Not unusual in the sense of not that different than you would have expected in other
yeah,
venues?
people were polite. They asked the same kinds of questions that I heard outside of Focus on the Family. There was no particular spirit of animosity. It seemed, from my point of view, to be a pleasantly routine event, not routine in a bad sense. And so I was somewhat surprised. My recollection is that when it was over, I was somewhat surprised to receive an ovation, because I didn't have a particular sense on my end that anything special was happening in the room. But you can tell that part of the story.
Yeah. First of all, at the Q&A, like, and you and I have not even talked about this, like, I was a little nervous at the Q&A. Like, John's my friend.
thank
You guys be nice, you know? I was really pleased to see, like, okay, tough question, but delivered so kindly and just honestly, like, good for you, you know? And I'm saying that inside. But when we got done, I walked up. I was moderating the Q&A, and I said, Jonathan Rauch. And not only an ovation, and this makes me emotional, but a standing ovation. And I knew immediately what that was. It was not, thank you, you convinced us, we're different now. It was absolutely, Mr. Rauch, thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. We know this was not easy, and we are so glad that you came to be with us and that you shared honestly and boldly from your heart. And like, it so touched me, and it was wonderful. But I have to tell another story. This is very personal. John is not like a real big toucher. He doesn't like to hug a lot, okay? After the ovation, there was a lineup of people who wanted to give him a nice, warm Christian hug, and John had to endure it.
I wanted to love on him a little bit. Right.
But the thing about it that is like, and everybody that came up like did not agree with him, but like, it was a human thing of like, city mouse, country mouse kind of thing. Like, you're different than us, but we're glad that you're here. And I have to tell a real quick story. So I got an idea later, like, we did this thing at Focus. It was cool, it was neat. I wrote a letter to the Human Rights Campaign, told them the story.
This is the big group. This is the most important gay rights group in the country. But let's say the biggest and most powerful gay rights group in the country.
And probably in the world in that way. And I just said, hey, we did this thing. It was really neat. Why don't I come to you and we can model the same sort of thing?
Well, how'd that work out?
Still waiting for the response.
Yeah, okay.
I check my mail every day.
That's right.
They're busy people.
Right.
They're busy. Now, I'm going to open this up, and my friends who are going to do mics, we're going to start this pretty soon, really quickly. So be thinking of your questions and comments. But I'm curious about both of your perspectives on this. Okay, it's some years later. Gay marriage is now the law of the freedom to marry is now legally
What we call in my world marriage.
Marriage. I knew you would do this to me. Okay,
What
All
we in our world call that thing.
That thing, yeah. Okay, so marriage equality is now the law of the land. And how, looking back, you said in that moment, people were feeling okay. So I haven't changed my mind about anything. I'm grateful for I think you used the word, he honored us by coming and telling what he wanted to say. And it was a exchange that was meaningful at the human and kind of the common human dignity level kind of thing. But we didn't change our mind. Okay. Has evangelical Christian America did this ultimately have any influence on anybody changing their mind about anything? I'm not asking it quite the right way. I'm trying to say, did either this one experience or any others like it shift anybody's thinking? I mean, literally the position, shift anything in the position, or no? In other words, that there was the human aspect, but no change in so-called position.
Yeah. That's a deep question, because I think baked into this issue has been, and I think it's poisoned the issue, is there's these people over here that are lovers and engage with everybody, and then there's haters. And, like, pick your side. And I had, like, constantly I was like, okay, so you're a hater. And I think there were evangelicals who were like, yeah, I don't really want to be a hater. And some are able to, like, just dismiss that. Like, that's ridiculous. Don't tell me what I know and believe and feel about people. But others, like, they absorb it, right? Like, I don't want to be a hater. I want to be a nice person. And I think that's a cheap divide. But I think you see that in evangelicalism. Like, I want to be the guy who's nice, So yeah, I'm like, I want to try to agree with everything. And you don't have the conviction of, like, no, I believe this. It's like gravity to me. Like, as I started, male and female for the family are a fundamental belief that I can never go back on. But I also believe at the same time, people have the right to do things that I disagree with. And we can live in that tension, and we have to live in that tension. And these are difficult things that we have to argue about. And I think, to be honest with you, it wouldn't be like, if we could overturn Obergefell, like, there would be implications to that.
That was the Supreme Court
Right.
decision that made marriage equality the law of the land.
Yeah. And just like overturning
If you could
Roe.
overturn it, you would.
Pardon me?
I interrupted you.
Yeah.
Could you finish the sentence about if we could overturn Obergefell?
I think the definition of marriage is very, very important. I don't think this was about marriage equality. I think this was about marriage redefinition. And so I hold that fundamentally. Now, that has real implications for John's life. Us overturning Roe, Focus on the Family celebrated that. That had real implications in the lives of people. Guess what? We live in a real adult world where real things matter. We have to live in that tension. Yeah.
So, same question to you. You could either speak personally in terms of your own actions as a public leader in this movement, or more generally, do you think there has been, I'm just going to say within evangelical America, do you see changes in position of some kind, or no?
Oh, sure. The polls show over the last 20 years dramatic movement, not only in the population as a whole, but among conservatives and evangelicals, younger evangelicals primarily, toward acceptance not necessarily embrace, but acceptance of same-sex marriage. And I think I saw a poll a couple of years ago that showed evangelicals at almost 50%. Now, there's been backing off of that because of the trans debate, which has sucked everything else into its vortex. But I think there's no doubt that a combination of having marriage equality and seeing that the horrible things that David Blankenhorn predicted would happen to families did not happen had an important impact. So that's just empirical. The things that happen are more like the things I said would happen. We never claimed that homosexuals could rescue straight marriage. You guys are, you're the problem there. But we did think it would be the right direction.
Actually, I 1000% agree on that.
Yeah, but we did think that it would be one step toward creating more social consensus around marriage, that it was a good thing.
So,
And then the other thing that
Yeah.
happened is I think the arguments that we made a difference. I don't know that any minds were changed in that room that day and light bulbs went up, but that's not how people are. I think they saw a case that they probably had to take more seriously than when they walked in the room. I will tell you just a very brief anecdote, if I can. Although the first person to say to me, "You guys have won, this issue's over, you guys have won," it was David Blankenhorn, and I thought at the time he was jumping the gun. The first time I had an inkling that we might attain marriage equality in my lifetime was 2004. I was on my book tour. I was on a Seattle radio talk show and explaining this case. Marriage is good for families. That's true of gay and straight. It strengthens communities. Why would you want gay people being poster children for the joys of out of wedlock parenting, all that? So someone calls in and says to the host, "Your guest is the most dangerous man in America." And the radio host says, "And caller, why would that be?" And the caller says, "Because he's making it sound so reasonable." And that's when I realized, we might win this thing.
that was their strategy, Glenn.
And what's interesting about that is precisely why I had John come. Like, if we're going to engage, don't engage boogeymen, engage the real thing
Engage the
on
best
both
argument.
sides, right?
All right, we're running with, thank you guys, really appreciate it. We're gonna open this up. It can be a question, it can be a comment, whatever you wanna make. So, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Hi. Jonathan, I want to thank you very much for everything you've done. My granddaughter, who is gay, is out. I mean, she's comfortable in the family, letting people know she had a girlfriend. They were all together in front of the family, and it's just as natural as can be. And I think it's on the backs of people like you. So I really appreciate that. The other thing that's really interesting is I'm Jewish. My kids became evangelical, which is really weird. And, it's interesting to see that, my sons, even with their evangelical background, they've embraced my granddaughter. And they have friends who are couples who are same sex. And so what I'm hearing from you, I have questions also, but I'm not going to bring them up right now. But what I'm hearing from you is this gradual process of acceptance, and it takes time, and that's helpful to hear. So,
Thank you. Your story is what it was more than 30 years ago now that I had hoped we might someday accomplish. Not really expecting it would be in my lifetime.
Yes, sir, here.
So I'm Tim from Minnesota. Thank you for coming today, and also thank you for living your life in public, because how I overcome my own homophobia is it's hard to hate people you know. I have a question about government policy, and what should we be aware of today that our government policies are doing that are affecting the family? And all three of you are expertise in this.
I'm going to go with that's a conversation for another day. It's an important question, but it gets us into policy rabbit holes and some controversial issues that are not directly related to this. So find me afterwards, or find Glenn or David.
Let's see. Yes, ma'am, in the front row.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Lena from Wisconsin, and I'm an evangelical Christian. We've led a faith and politics class at our large church. And the way that I'm just wondering if you've ever used this analogy that we try to help people think of the difference between spiritual marriage and legal marriage. There's many words that have a difference of meaning. For example, the word church, anytime church is used in legal documents, it has a very specific meaning. But as evangelicals, we have a different view of church. You know, it's not a building, you know, it's a body of Christ. So I'm just wondering if you've ever used that as a differentiator to help people kind of navigate through what we're going through right now.
What are your thoughts on that, Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, it's so well articulated and so nicely articulated. I very, very strongly, I think it's important that marriage is a social institution in the community, exists as a thing. Like, and God created it that way, you know, and he did that in a public sort of way. The idea that, well, we can have spiritual marriage over here and you can have your beliefs, but over here, like, we're not really interested. Like, no, these are real world things. And I said at the beginning, I study marriage from a sociological, anthropological, like from a human experience kind of thing. Like, it really does matter what we do with marriage and how we define and understand marriage. And that is God's lordship over everything. He's not just Lord of the spiritual realm, he's Lord of this thing that we're doing here today. You know, he's here, he's listening, he's interested, he's engaged. So to create that kind of divide can be damaging in some way.
Force pastors to marry gay couples. And that's where I said, oh no, that's not going to happen, because within the church, you can determine what, you know, how you foresee the formation of marriage. And so that's the distinguish.
Right.
Well,
trying to make.
and yeah, and that, like, that's a very big point. And you know, John and I, we can get into this, and I think we largely agree on this. But Jack Phillips, who's a very gracious man in Denver, he's a baker. He was in court 2 weeks ago, still being flat out hassled, saying, "You will make the cake that we demand that you make." So no, he's not a pastor, but he's a Christian who is being compelled to do things that he, by his conscience, simply cannot do.
I'm just going to agree quickly with the spirit of the question. I think American Christians made a wrong turn when they decided that secular law must reflect church law on marriage. There are millions of Americans who are legally married in a way that Catholics believe is not valid. But you don't hear Catholics saying the law should not allow divorce, for example. It should not the law should not recognize second marriages. I think that would have been making that distinction that you made would have been a healthier and more clarifying road for evangelicals to go down. They chose not to.
All right, so let's leave that as a disagreement that's on the table. And yes, ma'am, let's go here.
And there is one up here.
I'm sorry, say that point again. Oh, and then afterwards, do we have a mic? Can we get a mic up there? Okay.
Thank you. I really wanted to ask this. I'm Courtney. I'm from Pawling, New York. I am not gay, but this issue has affected me deeply. For most of my life, I'm a quasi-evangelical Christian, devout, who has gone into the performing arts, opera, which is the gayest of all of them. We may as well admit that. And I've lived betwixt and between on this issue. I feel that I've seen the love of Christ through same-sex marriages. It's been demonstrated to me, some of whom are Christian and some of whom are not. And yet, as a Christian, I see marriage as reflective of God's love for his church. So it's very difficult for me to reconcile this. But what I want to know, first I want to thank you both for living your deepest convictions, bringing them to this dialogue. You are demonstrating everything Braver Angels is about, and you're in relationship. And my question for you, I want to thank you, Glenn, for saying he is my friend. And I want to thank you, Jonathan. I told you last year that on my way to Kenosha, I listened to a podcast and you talked about my former pastor, Tim Keller, with whom you had what I understand to be a friendship. And so my question is, are there limits to the friendship? Can you really convince us that you can be friends? Because that's where I struggle. I feel that some of my friends have written me off because of my beliefs on either side. And I really want to know how to be a good friend and be true.
It's a beautiful question.
I'd address that to David Blankenhorn, who's done the best thinking of anyone I know on the deeper meaning of civility, which it's not so much about who you choose to be your personal inner circle, the person you're going to call when you're sick to take you to the hospital, but it is about how we treat each other civilly. Glenn and I became friends. David forgot to mention this, but I think it's important. Maybe you did mention this. When he founded Braver Angels, he called us both and asked us both to serve on the board. And I think that's partly because of this story, that this was
Yeah, it was because of that.
this was in embryo, the Braver Angels way, and we had just kind of figured it out and we're practicing it. But in terms of your specific question, I have no guidance for individuals in particular cases. I think these are always going to be hard calls. I'm Jewish, horrified by some of the reaction we saw after October 7th, and forced to face some people who are pretty close to me who see things in a way that I think is unacceptable. Same with the Trump phenomenon. I decided early on in both those cases, you know what, I'm not going to lose friends over this. I'm just not. I'll find a way not to. But that's been so hard in some cases.
I don't want this to sound like a Hallmark card thing because it can, but it's profoundly deep. And I think the way to do that is to simply ask, are you willing to see the human that I am as I try to see the human that you are? Because that's the common denominator. And if you're willing to do that, you can work through anything.
But you don't always have to. I mean, now and then you may have to decide, this person is just not someone that, this is not a
It's not a
relationship
nice
I can
human.
save.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll happen too.
Yeah. Up there, Sarah Silver.
Thank you for this moment. I want to say what a privilege it is to have you both here on stage today, Glenn and Jonathan and David, for bringing this together. The bigger piece I want to share is how privileged we are in America to be able to have this conversation. Democracy is fragile. Not all democracies in the world would even allow this conversation. I'm an immigrant. I know this. I'm a citizen of the world. So please understand the context in which we can have this privilege. I want to say this delicious moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the gentleman in the back, and then we're going to go to this gentleman here.
My question's for Jonathan. In the fall of 2014, ever how they do in Washington, D.C., around the Supreme Court and stuff, it got leaked out that Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg was debating on whether to give full marriage equality or to do it incrementally. So it was a real concern. Gill Foundation and several folks who are all involved in the movement of changing Marriage Foundation were really concerned. And her concern was that marriage equality would be similar to Brown versus Board of Education, that, it passes in 1957, but at least in Georgia, you don't have busing until 73. So you have 16 years before anything gets implemented. She was really concerned about that, supposedly from the word come out. So at the time, I was serving as director of Baptist Studies at Emory University Candler School of Theology, and so I get called, asked, "How can we help? What can we do?" And we needed to prove to Ruth Bader Ginsburg that, oh, we'll be fine in the South. We'll not give you any fits. We'll be glad to go along with whatever y'all decide. And of course, I lied in the midst of that and said, sure, we'll be glad to help go along with whatever the Supreme Court does. And she turned around and, we had what a lot of legislatures that winter of 2015 had, that religious exemption law that allowed you to discriminate on the basis of your religion. And Georgia was the only state that didn't pass it in the South. And so, I mean, we knew we were on
Do
the
you want
line.
to
And we
bring
had,
this just to a point?
had to do all that. So my question is, we haven't had the delay that Brown versus Board of Education had. So is there something about the shift of marriage equality that is different than what happened in racial equality in that kind of political dynamic?
Yeah.
And why is that the case? And how
But-
was that able to be done? Because I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a real point that maybe it should have been incremental, maybe. And, but she turned and decided to give full marriage
Thank you.
equality.
Would it be a sleazy move for me to ask you to answer that question? David Blankenhorn grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, born in 1955, and he was there for the Brown v. Board backlash. That's your world. What do you think was the difference in the very different way these court opinions were received?
I really think it was dramatically different in the case of marriage equality. I've not in my lifetime seen a social change that occurred this rapidly and has sunk its roots this deeply. I've never seen anything like it. Certainly compared to the race issue. And I've given a lot of thought to why that's the case. And I'm not sure I'm not sure I know. I do believe that the movement that John was a leader of, I guess is still a leader of, I believe they ran a hell of a good campaign. There's the strategy that he talks about of engaging people, everything about it was done in I've never seen anything this well done. At a deeper level, I think that straight people seeing gay people in their families, in their communities. I remember the first time a gay couple walked into the little church in Mississippi that I was, I mean, people didn't look at the dinner table and see, an African American, but they, at a certain point, they did start seeing openly, gay in their families. And when I was giving talks, people would always come up to me and I would say, oh, we don't want gay marriage. And the gay and lesbian people, women allies, but especially gay and lesbian people would come up to me and they would say, I want to show you a picture of my children. They would always do this and it pissed me off because they, well, you want to see a picture of my children? But eventually I really realized what they were trying to do was just more or less saying, we do exist here, we exist. And it was, if I could just say one other thing about this, I'll be quick because I don't want this to, I had 1,000 reasons to be against gay marriage. I wrote a whole book about it. I spent years having this thick intellectual armor. I had answers to every question. I had read all the studies. And when I changed my view on the subject in terms of public policy, And John was the first person I told that I was going to do it. And amazingly, the first thing he said after I told him this was, how do you think this is going to affect you personally in terms of your donors that, I mean, that was the first question he had. Not like, oh, I'm so glad you finally saw the light. No, how is this going to affect you personally? So this is the kind of guy this is. But what I really wanted to say too is that I haven't changed. I've still read all the studies. I actually believe everything I've always believed about the importance of marriage. I believe what Glenn said about all this. What changed my mind about the gay marriage issue was it started with meeting John and meeting Michael, who's now that it's possible, when it became possible, they're married. So, what happened to me was I realized that I had intellectually had this armor and I was not open to the lived experiences of people who wanted to love and be loved. I was like, wow, these people are living out there. They're just out there living their lives, and they're not just on a campaign to win a political victory. They're out. So for me, it was not an intellectual change as much as it was relational. And it really did start with John. And I've said this to him many times. I mean, that was the key for me, because he never said to me, he said you're wrong about gay marriage, of course, but he never said you're a homophobe. And I can promise you, plenty of people did, but he never did. And he basically, and when I told him I was going to change my mind, he said, well, but how's this going to affect you personally? Like, I'm a little worried about you personally. That was really what he said, amazingly. And so, yeah, for me, that's a long-winded answer to your question. I apologize for going on and on about it, but the change, I think, was so quick on this, partly because it was well done, the campaign, but maybe at a deeper level because of the emergence in society of openly gay and lesbian people who were in families and in communities, and all of a sudden, here these folks are. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, because on the race issue, African Americans still largely lived on the other side of the tracks. It wasn't that there was a different thing about it. I don't know that anyway.
Well, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I'll just add a couple footnotes. One is, let's face it, folks, race is different from everything else in America. Do you agree with that?
I do.
You agree with that? I mean, comparing anything to race turns out it just doesn't work. For a while, Obama was elected, I thought, maybe race is going to be like everything else in America. We'll get over it. Guess what? So I think that's a big factor. But a second thing is, I think one of the reasons that our campaign moved faster was people learned from massive resistance. I think there was some moral learning that took place as a result of that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But that's
So you notice the roots of Braver Angels, the foundation of that in this process that David Blankenhorn went through, of making that personal connection and dropping that armor that was protecting him. That's what we're doing here, right? That's where this comes from. It's the creation story.
Yeah, for me personally, this explains, me doing this. Let's go. Yes, sir.
Bruce from New York. So I'm a United Methodist. We've been going through our own struggles recently with all of this. But a little off topic, but what I wanted to bring up and get your comment on is always the use of the term evangelical Christian, because I bristle at that in that it's redundant. All Christians are called to be evangelical. That's the Great Commission. Go out and spread the good news and make disciples of Jesus Christ. And why I really don't like it is because in churches that are, so I would prefer conservative Christian to evangelical Christian, because what I think it does is for all of the other Christians that are not conservatives, it really makes them afraid, to be evangelical, which is what we need. So to comment on that.
What do you got, Glenn?
I love the question. I mean, I use evangelical more in a sociological perspective. Um, Conservative, like I bristle to that because I don't, I mean, then, okay, like then you're a Christian nationalist, you know, and I think you're hitting on, we throw these terms around and like that's the umbrella that you need to get under when they're not really descriptive of what's what. My thing with conservative is like, no, I'm a conservative politically, I'm a Christian, and that's a separate thing because of my Christian convictions, and my Christian convictions align with a lot of conservative ideals, but I don't really see myself necessarily as a conservative, although functionally I very much unapologetically am. So that's the problem with labels. And then like Jonathan, he wrote a great piece in the Atlantic number of years ago about how the LGBT thing is like meaningless. And I will say that, like, so what do you think about LGBTQ people? There aren't any, you know? And John would agree with that. You know,
We'll
it's
let
labels.
Oh, let's see. Let's go to this lady right here.
Hi. I wanted to share some experience that informs my view of some of what might emerge in the transgender conversations. Because I don't know, about 10 years ago, I married a man, my second husband, who, after a couple of years we were together, got in touch with the part of himself that really wanted to live his life as a woman. And first, that was kind of shocking and hard for me, et cetera, et cetera. What do I do about that? But what I came to realize, talked with a social worker, had some experience and this and that. And this man still loved me. He was attracted to women. He was attracted to me. There was not really a problem. I guess my initial reaction was, oh, people are going to reject me. They're going to think I'm weird. Why would I stay in such a situation? And within about 6 months or so, I started realizing people really didn't care, you know, but they weren't that absorbed with me in my life. And once I realized I wasn't going to be rejected myself, and I became okay with it because the relationship wasn't about genitalia. It was about love and caring about each other. It was a bit harder for his daughter. She took about another 6 or 12 months to come to peace with it. But when we look at relationships, that's really kind of what it's about.
Thank you. Let's go in the back. I see there's a woman in the back who's sort of toward the back raising her hand. Yes, you. Yes. So sorry, I'm saying you. This wonderful person right here.
Hi. Jonathan, you mentioned the vortex of transgenderism, and I'm grieving the children, and I'm wondering your take on that, because I know I grew up conservative. My dad's a pastor, God bless him, died at 101. But I know a lot of church people that put everybody in the same bag. And I think with this transgender ideology, things that are going on with our children that in other nations they've caught up and said, oh, we need to reevaluate this. The way we're doing this with our children is not right, and they're pulling away from this agenda that seems to be promoted by our government. And so please offer your perspective on that for the little ones. If I don't even know if this is the right venue to ask this question.
I want to acknowledge the very powerful statements that are made by you and my friend here, different ways of thinking about this. I want to acknowledge the power of those feelings. I also want to say it's a bit of a different topic. We have about 10 minutes left. So I want to both say you've been heard here, and I want to ask if either John or uh, Glenn want to say something brief, but I also want to acknowledge that it's kind of its own discussion, a little bit, which you know what I mean? I say this with deep respect. You want to, anybody want to say anything?
Well, I'm afraid this will disappoint you. It's a big, complicated question. And there's no way to do justice to it in 30 seconds. I stated my views on it in an article about a year and a half ago, which you can find by Googling my name, and I think the headline was Walking Transgender Extremism Back, I think. So that would be a good starting point or a separate conversation. The marriage campaign, like the military campaign, was all about integrating into existing social norms. Now, Glenn and David would dispute that and say we were changing the norms. But I think my view on that has been vindicated. The transgender issue involves medicine, it involves children, age of consent, definitions of male and female. It is vastly more complicated.
Go to the gentleman right here on the corner of the blue shirt.
Thanks. I'm Rob Hansen from Boise, Idaho. Last Saturday, I was at the Pacific Northwest Mennonite Conference, and I was invited to do a Brave Angels workshop on the how to disagree better. And my question more to you, Glenn, the Mennonite Church is similar to the Mormon Church, or excuse me, the Methodist Church, in that we recently have allowed pastors to do gay marriage. And so we're seeing a big exodus of like rural churches. And the question is like, how much difference, and there's no right or wrong answer, I'm just curious of your thoughts. How much difference can Christians in community live with and say it's okay?
So, I mean, you just said that the Mormon church is Mennonite. Okay, okay, good. I'm glad I asked for that clarification. I mean, it's a very disturbing kind of thing for me, like even like with the Methodist Church, like the decision that they made, like that grieves me deeply. And I think it was interesting, like I saw the convention, I if that's what you guys call it, the general, yeah, the general conference. Like there was a statement at the beginning that certain language was not allowed. And they said, reporting is not policing. If you hear certain language that could be harmful to other people, report it. You know, like, and that goes back to your Kindly Inquisitor's book, right? So these conversations are not happening as purely as we would like to think that they are. They're very coercive. And I think that we have to argue, and I think that's why this is unique here, that we are having this conversation here. And we do see different sides as legitimate. But in the church, that is decreasing, unfortunately.
On that note, I want to thank you all, and we're going to just quickly before we adjourn, I want to ask you guys what you're taking away from this experience, this conversation. Did you see some things that weren't just your evaluation? And I'm not asking for it. Just what do you really think? And what do you? How was this for you? And are you taking away anything? Let's go with you first, Glenn.
I thought it was amazing. First of all, like we didn't rehearse any of this, and David's like asking questions. I'm like, well, that is such a multi-layered question. And then John's response to it, and then my response, and like we're demonstrating the complexity and the multi-levels and things that John and I like absolutely agree on, and then things that we way don't agree on. But we can still be in relationship and friendship in the midst of that. And that is something, folks, in America that we absolutely need so much more of. And it is such a premium, just as this woman up here so nicely said. And we need to cherish that and fight for that.
John?
Well, my takeaway is gratitude to David and Glenn, from whom I've learned so much. It's even greater gratitude to you in the room. The ethos in this room of caring, of commitment to something larger than ourselves, to looking under each other's hoods and finding the person there. That's this whole convention. I'm an atheist. Braver Angels conventions are probably the closest thing in my life to church, and that's because of the attitude that you all bring here of care and commitment for each other and for our country, and that's what I felt in the room today. I also felt glad to have an opportunity to tell the story. I noticed sitting up here near the front is my new friend Alex, who is 25 years old, and I'm guessing that he's hearing some of this stuff for the first time. And I am very gratified that his generation will never know what I knew, that he doesn't even really remember a time when Michael and I, when it was illegal for me to marry in all 50 states. In fact, when it was illegal for us to have intimate sexual relations in most states. So just the opportunity to tell these stories and to touch your hearts is something that I am forever grateful for.
Thanks, Scott.